Hey, everybody. Welcome to Dad Talk Today. I'm your host, Eric Carroll. I'm joined with Jeff Morgan and Mr. Jeff Younger. In this broadcast, I'm going to be referring to Jeff Morgan as Morgan since we got two Jeffs. But it's so good to see you, fellas. This is a case that we have been following for quite some time now. And I'd say for anybody in the community that's watching this, we really need your help because I feel like Jeff's case is very important because if something's not done about this, you're going to start seeing this go on all across the country. And I've already seen more cases are coming to us every day with this issue. And I never knew it would get to this point. But before we get too far into it, Jeff, what's going on, my man?
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. First off, I'd like to say I'm sorry that you're going through this. My heart as a dad grieves right alongside of you. You've had a lot of stuff going on over the past couple of years. Could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and the situation that you're going through?
Well, it really all started when my son was about 2.5. While I was still married, my ex-wife would do crazy things like put my son in timeout and say, the monsters only eat boys. Don't be a boy. And eventually, when he was just around 3 years old, she filed for divorce and used some trickery to kind of push me out of the house. The usual tactics we're all familiar with in divorce. And right after my son's 3rd birthday, he was telling me that mommy's teaching him that he's a girl. And there's a video on YouTube you can get. Just search for "Mommy Says I'm a Girl." And you'll see right there with me for the first time learning that he believed he was a girl and he believed his mom.
Now, Jeff, what was that like as a father, hearing for the first time that mommy was wanting him to be her girl, or even hearing this, from James? I mean, what was going through your head at that point in time? I'm sure there was a lot of emotions.
Yeah, it's at that point that I realized right then that this divorce was about a lot more than just some small disagreements with stepdaughters. It's at that point that I realized she probably married me just to be a sperm donor that pays child support. It's at that point that I realized I was probably dealing with a high-functioning psychopath or high-functioning sociopath. And it was at that point that I realized she would be willing to do anything to hurt me, and she would be willing to sacrifice the life of this child.
This is so crazy. I mean, it really is, and I think another aspect to your case is it somewhat turned into a political thing. I know a lot of the politicians have gotten involved. I know Ted Cruz stepped in at one point in time. Could you walk us through some of that and, how this kind of progressed through the courts?
Well, I was one of the first cases in the country, and so there's a strategy from the left wing, the radical left wing of the LGBT community, where lesbians would go out and get pregnant, and then they would go into family court and try to advance their agenda, their anti-child agenda, and I think that's kind of what happened to me. When I got married to Ann Georgelis, she's a pediatrician in Capel. When I married her, many of her friends came to me and told me they were surprised that they thought she was a lesbian. So once I realized the danger to my son, and I realized that it was probably something that was being backed by more than just my ex-wife, I decided that I wasn't going to be quiet about it. And I decided that this was a community problem, that this is child abuse. This is sexual abuse of a child, tampering with a child's sexual identity, and I can't think of anything worse. It's right up there with physical rape of a child because it sends them straight towards sexual mutilation and sex change surgeries before the end of puberty. So I decided that it was a community issue, and everyone needed to know what was being done to children in their community and what the courts were doing to children in their community. And very predictably, both Democrats and Republicans, libertarians, were outraged by it, horrified and outraged by it. And it wasn't just Ted Cruz, the governor of Texas, the Texas Attorney General. You may know that very recently we just had a Democrat at the federal level introduce legislation outlawing these practices. It's not really a partisan issue. It's an issue of people who see this as child abuse and people who are willing to excuse it as some kind of new form of identity politics.
I'm with you. And, we have a lot of focus on parental alienation, which it seems like you had some of that going on here. Let's walk through that process, though, Jeff, for anyone that wants to know. At 7 years old, this is how I've been told the story. They're wanting to remove his genitals and pump him full of hormones.
Yeah. So starting as I said, at 3.5 years old, she began to teach him that he was a girl. She began to cross-dress him immediately at age 3.5. So he was being presented in public as a girl with his fake girl's name. By the time he had reached 5 years old, my resistance to this had gotten more effective, and she started presenting him as a girl at school, dressing him as a girl at school. He goes to school even now as a girl. The courts won't stop it, and even though I have a court order, they won't enforce it. So she took him to a pediatrician, and in a 30-minute consultation, diagnosed him with gender dysphoria, and referred him to a married lesbian gender psychologist in Dallas. She visited that psychologist for 1 hour, and then that psychologist referred my son to the Genesis Clinic to explore, quote, and this is in the medical records, this is a direct quote, to explore the medical side of treatment starting at age 8. And the intention was to put him on puberty blockers at 8 and cross-sex hormones at 10. I took my son to that same gender psychologist. Her name is Rebecca Orr in Oak Lawn here in Dallas. Rainbow Counseling is her company. I took my son there. She put 2 sticky notes down on the table in a private session. And she put his fake girl's name and his name, James. And she said, which name do you want to be called? And he said, I want to be called James. So one of the unique aspects of my case that doesn't get a lot of talk is that my son only presents as a girl with his mother. With everyone else, including me, he presents as a boy.
And
why are the courts then privileging this abnormal gender expression with his mom? And why aren't they questioning where that's coming from?
I think, Jeff, it's also important to note now, they tried to silence you on this subject. As the father, they've tried to silence you from talking about this subject as well.
They have. I am currently under a gag order. Well, let's start off during the temporary orders that I was under for 3 years.
Yep.
The court said that during the divorce that I could not refer to my son using male pronouns, that I could not present him to anybody as a boy, that I could not teach him that he was a boy, which prevented me from teaching him traditional Christian doctrine on male and female and sexuality. The best I could do safely was I would read in the book of Genesis up to the creation of man and woman. That's the best I could do. And that lasted for 3 years. I was not able to even teach him that he was a boy. Then after I sort of semi-won my case, I got equal custody, but I didn't get sole possession. I got equal parental rights. I still don't have 50-50 possession. The court issued a gag order, which I'm under now. And the gag order says that I'm not allowed to talk about transgender issues, LGBT issues, whether my son is a boy or girl. I cannot refer to him by his real name unless it's people that know him as his real name. And I'm not allowed to in any way disparage his treatment at the hands of my ex-wife. And I've just decided that I have a constitutional right to do those things, that the anti-SLAPP statutes at the federal and Texas and state level in Texas adequately protect my exercise of civil rights, and the courts have no authority to gag me. And I think, the big message I would like to get out is we have to stop following unconstitutional orders from the courts. And I'm just not following them. And I'm inviting the court to hold me in contempt. My lawyer has a writ of habeas corpus prepared. We are ready to go to the Texas Supreme Court and challenge the idea that a family court has the right to tell a father they can't talk about their own children.
And what's crazy, Jeff, is we've tried to post about this even when I knew you was gagged. I said he's got to have a voice, and if they're not going to allow him to talk, we're going to talk. And it's crazy when speaking about this, how many people are actually approving of this going on. So, I mean, I'd like to talk to our audience right here, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, even if you believe in LGBT or what your beliefs are on that. We're talking about a 7-year-old boy. He's 9 now, but 7 years old. No child is in a position to do something like this that is going to affect them for the rest of their lives. We talk about the suicide rates, especially inside of transgender. It's enormous, because once that's done, there's no going back.
You know what's astonishing, and this is one of the real problems we have in family court, is just bad expert information just gets deployed in family courts, right?
Right.
So I'm a working statistician, and at court, all these studies were deployed against me, but the main one that was deployed against me was it was a giant meta study. Retrospective meta study, which as soon as you hear those two words in statistics, you just immediately discount it. You just never, we don't take retrospective studies, and we don't like meta studies. They have to be so carefully tailored. They're almost never done right. And this study, it was huge. It was done throughout the entire Anglosphere, the United Kingdom, United States, Canada, Australia. And they found all of these benefits from these transgender treatments, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and even surgery. Well, I just got the raw data for the study, and I just did a rudimentary descriptive statistical analysis on this. And it was clear that the treatments. So I testified this at court. They had amazing, top endocrinologists saying I was crazy or whatever. 2 months ago, that study was retracted by the APA for the very reasons that I just said, because it actually showed no benefit and actually showed harm to the people. That's consistent with the evidence that my experts presented. I had to hire the top transgender experts in the world, the people that founded the original Johns Hopkins clinic. They shut that clinic down after 4 years because they could prove their treatments were harming patients. So they trained up on my case, and then they testified in the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom courts outlawed the practice on children under 16, right? So we know these treatments, not only do they not help, they harm patients. And that's been well known since the 70s. This is being done for ideological reasons, not medical or psychological reasons.
I got one thing there, Morgan, and I'm going to pass it to you because I know you've been following this case really closely alongside of Jeff. But, there might be people here that's thinking an occurrence like this is rare. Once I started, posting about your case, Jeff, I started getting reached out to from parents all over that this is happening to them as well. This isn't a rare thing. Lots of people are going through this right now. Tell us about some of the people that have reached out to you, Jeff, since this has been going on with you.
Well, you may know Rob Hoogland in Canada. Rob Hoogland is a typical case where children are transitioned secretly without the parents' knowledge. The schools, he's in Vancouver, British Columbia. The schools pushed his child into social transition at school without telling the parents. And then had even begun push the child towards puberty blockers and hormones without telling the parents. When Rob Hoogland found out about this, he began to object to it, and they took his kid away from him for it. Then he started talking about it, and he started naming the names of the doctors who were doing this to the child. And he 3 days ago, he was put in prison in Canada for merely telling people what happened to his child. She's past the point of no return. She's been on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones long enough that she's going to have all of the terrible health effects of this. And that was all done against his wishes, without his consent, and half of it was done without his knowledge by the school. I have another friend in Minnesota. His name is Brent Netz. His child, he lost possession in a divorce, and his wife took advantage of his autistic child, convinced this autistic boy that he was a girl, and got this boy on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones as well. And he's only recently had the money and the wherewithal to get legal representation that can handle this fight. He's recently gotten 50-50 possession, but he hasn't yet been able to stop the transition of his son. He's filed a lawsuit against the gender clinic because they denied him access to his own child's medical records and refused to communicate with him any aspect of the treatment. So what we have here, and I got to tell you, most of this is being done by moms. In the cases where you see it's being done by fathers, it's because the fathers went transgender and transitioned themselves. That's what you mainly see from the fathers. But most of these children are being transitioned by mothers. And they're using the family court system and the usual biases against fathers to secure their ability to do that against the father's wishes.